Today, we're going to talk about parent training and why it is the recommended treatment for kids with ADHD. And we're also going to talk about coaching to help you understand the difference between the two and be able to make an informed decision about what you feel that your family needs.
Welcome to the ADHD Parenting Podcast with Mike McLeod of GrowNOW ADHD and Ryan Wexelblatt of ADHD Dude. Learn about parenting kids with ADHD from a licensed clinical social worker and speech-language pathologist who specializes in ADHD. No fluffy parenting advice, only practical information that will equip you to help your child with ADHD effectively.
Absolutely. And parent training is the recommendation. We talked about this on one of the very first episodes of this podcast, of all the various recommendations for once you get that diagnosis of ADHD and executive function challenges for your child. And parent training is really the core recommendation, but it is still so forgotten on so many evaluations and doctor recommendations. It's that missing link that I continually hear from parents that they're not being recommended and they're simply not getting from their providers.
So, Mike, I think first we should talk about, what is the recommended treatment, and then we can talk about what the evidence shows a little bit. And we'll tell people the website if you want to see this yourself. So the recommended treatment from the American Academy of Pediatrics for kids with ADHD under 6 is parent training first, followed by the use of methylphenidate if necessary. For ages 6 and up, it's parent training in conjunction with that medication management piece. Okay. So some other things that have shown strong efficacy for treating ADHD are what we would call executive skills treatment or executive function coaching. Obviously, medication is the first line most effective defense, or I shouldn't say defense, I should say medication is the number one first line treatment in terms of showing effectiveness. So when we talk about this, what we want parents to understand is we're citing that there's evidence behind this. And if you want to see this information yourself, go to the website, effectivechildtherapy.org, type in ADHD, and you'll see a list there. It's categorized into like 5 different groups, and it shows you by evidence how effective things are. So in the number 1 group, you will see the parent training piece, as well as executive skills coaching or executive function treatment. And we'll talk about kind of what that means. And then it kind of goes down from there. And we should mention, even though we're not talking about it in this episode, Mike, do you know what the only thing in number 5 is?
For the 5th recommendation?
No, 5th being number 5 being tested and does not work.
Cognitive behavioral therapy?
No, it's actually it's actually social skills groups.
Oh, social skills groups, of course. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the things, Mike, I think you should talk about is let's explain kind of the trajectory most people have when they come to us, because I think it's pretty similar. And for years, we've kind of heard the same stories from families of this very similar trajectory. And I'm going to, lead into this by saying, I have a saying that parents are unintentionally misled as soon as their child receives a diagnosis. So why don't you talk about that and what we hear regularly?
Correct. And that's a really that's a great way of putting it, is they're unintentionally misled. So one of the things that I have the privilege of doing is I have the privilege of talking to parents one-on-one over the phone when they first want to learn more about GrowNOW services. So I get to chat with them directly myself, one-on-one between myself and the families. And it is incredibly rare for parents to come to GrowNOW as their very first stop. Once they receive an ADHD diagnosis. I would say really 95 to maybe even 99% of families have already been through several unsuccessful therapies, interventions, and approaches in the past, where they have wasted valuable time and lots of money on really expensive valuations and treatments to help improve their child's executive functioning, decrease the stress in the home, improve success at school, and they've just been through it all. And this is because so many really powerful doctors, neuropsych, psychiatrists, psychologists are providing outdated recommendations that don't involve parent training. And so many of the recommendations we're seeing are just your typical talk therapy, counseling, where the child is meeting with a therapist once or twice a week, and they are talking about their feelings, running through various different experiences they went through throughout the day and throughout the week, their thoughts and their feelings behind it, your basic back and forth talk therapy where, at the end of the day, your child might enjoy going there. They may play Legos while they talk or have other really fun games, things like that. But how that the research, what we know about executive functioning and the time blindness and the issues with working memory, because this is an executive functioning deficit and not more of an overall, mental health, depression, those kinds of things. This is executive functioning at its core. That approach of talk therapy is not going to be successful, especially when parent training is not the number one focus.
So let me elaborate a little more on what Mike said there. So when we talk about executive functioning, one of the things we talk about is what's called a child's time horizon. So kids with ADHD live in the moment, as many of you already know. Mike, why don't you explain the time horizon?
Sure. Yeah. So the time horizon is how far into the future a child can see based on their nonverbal working memory foresight, which is their ability to see into the future, their ability to visualize what the future might look like. For all you adults and you parents listening to this podcast right now, you can stop and think and visualize what the rest of your day is going to look like today. When you finish work, or when you finish this podcast, or when you get to work, when you get home, and all the different things you're going to do, you can make a mental movie in your mind of the rest of your day. ADHD at its core is a deficit of nonverbal working memory and the visual imagery system. So one of the things you constantly hear about ADHD kids is they're just so impulsive. They're just so impulsive. And because of that, it's because they're stuck in the now. They do not have an advanced hindsight to visualize the past and learn from the past, and a foresight to visualize the future. Their time horizon is significantly delayed, so they are just stuck in the now. So their brain is hardwired towards instant gratification in the now.
So what that means is about what Mike is saying about being stuck in the now is that that's where they learn. So for example, okay, with a kid with ADHD, the reason why parent training and school supports are, the number one recommended treatment in conjunction with medication management is because they need to be taught in the moment. Okay. So let's say, your child goes to therapy and say the therapist says, okay, we're going to work on coping skills. Well, they're not going to learn something in therapy and then remember to put that to use a week later. And this is why Dr. Barkley says, another name for ADHD is attention deficit disorder. They might intend to use what they learned in therapy, but it's not going to happen. And this is actually why no type of therapy, including play therapy, has shown any efficacy in addressing ADHD-related challenges. As Mike mentioned before, that, many pediatricians, school, counselors, social workers, whoever, many, people who do psychological testing, they tend to refer families to a therapist when the child is diagnosed. And they are not doing that to mislead anybody. They're doing that because they're not familiar with what the evidence shows or what the treatment recommendations are. Okay. And in their mind, they might think, oh, well, anybody who has ADHD needs therapy. And there's just no evidence to show that that's the case. One other thing I want to mention here, a lot of times parents will say to me, well, what if they have anxiety also? Or, what if they have this? Because lots of kids have, some other condition as well as ADHD. Yes, they do. And again, okay, because of the fact that they live in the moment, the reason why something like cognitive behavior therapy, which is one of the most effective forms of therapy there is, why it doesn't work for kids with ADHD is because they can't apply what they learned later unless there is a parent there or a teacher to kind of scaffold that for them. Okay. So what we know is cognitive behavior therapy has shown success with older teens and adults with ADHD. It can work really well, but for kids, not so much. Are there certain aspects of cognitive behavior therapy that I think are really helpful, such as what we call exposures for like things like anxiety? Yes. So let's get into talking about what exactly parent training is, because this is a confusing term. And, one of the things is in the American Academy of Pediatrics treatment recommendations, they refer to it as parent behavior training, but sometimes it's also referred to as behavior therapy, which really confuses parents, or it can be, parent behavior therapy. So parent training has all these interchangeable terms that really confuse parents. And one of the things that I learned is that the American Academy of Pediatrics kept that terminology vague on purpose, which I think was actually a really bad idea for them to do that because it's confusing. And even, a lot of times what I find when people learn the recommendations, they say, oh, well, I need a behavior therapist for my child. So people get really confused about this. Often they think that, oh, well, behavior therapy, that means I have to send my child to, somebody who calls themselves a behavior therapist and they're going to change their behavior. No, it doesn't work like that. So what parent behavior training is, or parent behavior therapy, whatever you want to call it, we just call it parent training, is the parents learning skills and scaffolding to help improve behavior or executive functioning, in Mike's case, or social skills. And that is something that they do at home because, again, parents have to learn in the moment. Okay. So, for instance, what I provide through the ADHD Dude membership site is parent training. And I have different sections of it. I have, a behavior program called Scaffolding Better Behavior. My older program is the executive function program, where it's nothing academic. I just talk about the foundational executive function skills at home. And the other program is about creating daily expectations and social skills. I have a program for, and one to help with bedtime. But anyway, the whole point of all of it is it's about parents learning strategies that they can implement at home. It is not about playing therapist with a kid. It's not about having the kids sit down and watch videos. It's for parents to have this training. Now, I'm going to let Mike explain what he does. But one of the things I want to lead into this with is helping people understand that, the other thing that there's a lot of interchangeable terms for is what we would call executive function treatment or executive function therapy, or what is often called executive function coaching or ADHD coaching. And this is something that is, I think, Mike, just as confusing to families as the, parent behavior training, because again, there's these terms for it and they don't necessarily know what it means. So one of the things we both find is that often, parents will, I'll say for myself, they'll ask me, my child needs an ADHD coach. Okay. And, often when they talk about that, what I find is they think that they need somebody just to work on academic organizational skills. And
Correct.
Mike is going to explain why, executive function treatment is much more than that, and why just having a coaching session with a kid without any parent involvement is not a productive use of time.
Yeah, so when it comes to the specific GrowNOW model that we use of approaching this parent training and executive functioning coaching, really what we do is we mix up an hour session between one-on-one work between coach and student combined with parent training. So we like to get to know the student and work with the student to get to know them as a unique individual and really work directly with them, understand them, learn their likes, their dislikes, their strengths, their needs, build a separate rapport to them, and to have a separate adult that they can have a relationship with, someone else who can hold them accountable and walk them through several different strategies and exercises to strengthen those internal executive functioning skills. But the biggest thing, the biggest approach is the parent training. So getting to know the child as a unique individual helps us to individualize the parent training for those parents. So working directly with the parents and doing the parent training, that's where really 90 to 99% of the progress really comes from, is giving the parent exercises and strategies and different things to use in the home. For example, using less language and not interacting with your child when they're dysregulated. So we talk a lot about parents getting unintentionally sent to different therapies that are ineffective. Parents are often unintentionally falling into these traps that are increasing the child's dysregulation, such as trying to talk to them when they're already dysregulated, or responding to their noise, or responding to their emotional manipulation, which ends up feeding into those negative attention-seeking behaviors. Fully understanding how conflict-seeking the brain can be, how the ADHD brain can be. So the ADHD child or teenager needing stimulation by seeking conflict with the parents, because that's one of the things that really stimulates the brain. So working very closely with the parents, not only to change how they use language, but also taking a look at the child's day. How often are they stuck in the virtual world? How often are they on screens? How often are they stuck within the walls of the house? Ryan and I talk all the time about how important it is for kids with ADHD to have a sense of belonging in their community, to have outdoor play, to have face-to-face play with peers. What we see time and time again are these ADHD kids that wake up, go to school, come home, stay home, and they're stuck within the walls of the home. And one of the problems is when you're stuck at home, you're stuck under the parent's microscope all day long. So the mom and dad are just constantly around the child, watching them all day. And it's only a matter of time until you start picking out the negatives and you're burnt out because your child's always home, always creating conflict. So working with the parents to create a schedule and also learn different ways to interact with their child and use language.
So I want to explain, because as Mike was talking, this just popped into my head. I want to share with people, two of the most recent things I've heard from families who tried, ADHD coaching. And I want to preface this by saying there's lots of good coaches out there. There's lots of coaches with good training. Just because somebody goes through an ADHD coaching program does not make them a good coach, by the way. Just like the same way somebody who goes through a doctoral program in psychology, or in my case, master's in clinical social work, that doesn't make them necessarily a good therapist, right? Mike, talk a little bit. I think you should talk about what does an actual session look like? Like, get a little more into detail about that, like the structure of it with GrowNOW.
Of course, absolutely. So really what we do is we develop an individualized plan for each student and each family. And the way that we word all of the goals on that plan, for all you parents out there who have seen IEPs that are written with that ridiculous, with 7 out of 10 trials, with 90% accuracy, all of that nonsense you see on IEPs that make no sense whatsoever, we write all of our goals with fading prompts towards independence, because that's how we approach these sessions. We want this to be as short of a process as possible for families. True ADHD executive functioning coaching is about giving the parents the skills, giving the child some strategies they can use so that they can have it and they no longer need our services as quickly as possible. It's all about giving them the tools. So we work one-on-one with the child and we go through different practical strategies to strengthen those internal executive functions.
Mike, be more specific and talk about like some of the things you work on with the kids before like you help the parents reinforce them. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. So working with the child, we do a lot of exercises and strategies towards strengthening nonverbal working memory in the visual imagery system. So that's the foundation of all executive functions. So we go through several different exercises, helping them to visualize their past and pick out pieces from it in terms of what they were doing, what happened, what was the cause and effect, what can we learn from past experiences so we don't repeat mistakes, and also nonverbal working memory foresight exercises to visualize the future so they can better plan, prioritize, problem solve, and delay gratification. You need nonverbal working memory foresight, future thinking skills to be able to get the hard, boring, non-stimulating stuff done now so you can move on to more preferred tasks later. And that's the foundation of really all these ADHD behaviors is delayed gratification issues. So working with the child to really strengthen those internal foundational executive skills, and also, whether it's academic executive functioning, which is really, being able to gain those study skills and, get work done and persevere through non-preferred tasks, home executive functioning, which is most common, which is dysregulation towards parents and the ability to initiate, persist, and complete non-screen-based tasks in the home, or social executive functioning, which is those perspective-taking skills and the ability to make friends and keep friends. And then we work directly with the parents and teach them various strategies on how to decrease that consistent every single day argument vortex with their child. So parents every day find themselves in this vicious cycle of they know there's going to be a fight. There's going to be an argument, morning routine, homework, evening routine. It's going to be a fight every single day. So working with the parent to decrease those fights and get their kids outside, get them out of the house, decrease those screens to improve independence. So that's the biggest thing, is everything has to be about independence and quality of life, where the kid is doing more and the adults in their lives are doing less. That is the simplest way to put it. That's executive function coaching. That's parent training. Adults do less, parents do less, kid does more. That's the end of all of it. And once that's happening, that's the progress.
So I want to explain a little bit, with what I do in my membership site, which is, it's a series of different courses. And in the parent behavior training course, what parents learn is just very concrete, specific strategies to help address behaviors and improve behavior at home. And a lot of what the focus on is learning to be proactive rather than be reactive to things.
Oh, yeah.
So, for example, one of the things we see with a lot of kids with ADHD is they struggle with unstructured time at home. That is one of the most common times that they engage in provoking siblings or behaviors that will elicit an emotional response from parents because they're being provocative or, whatever it is. So if we can learn how to create scaffolding to avoid them struggling during those unstructured times, that's one of the things we do. Another thing, it teaches how to, not get pulled into what I call the argument vortex or the negotiation vortex or the reasoning vortex. How to create daily expectations at home, because this is something that Mike and I see a lot. A very big problem with in a lot of families of kids with ADHD is what I call high giving, low expectations, where kids have no expectations on them. They don't help around the house. All they're expected to do is do their homework. And that is not helpful. It's not helpful to their executive function skill development. And it's certainly not helpful to their behavior at home or teaching them how to think about others or be a contributing, member of a family. So that's really what I do. And I offer office hours where people come and they ask questions, and I answer them, live through the membership site. So I wanted to mention, Mike, so last night I had office hours, and what we're talking about came up twice. First parent was like a parent of a 7-year-old, and they said, and they're talking a lot about emotional dysregulation. And they said, well, my son is in play therapy and, whatever else. And I think their expectation was that by going to play therapy, that's somehow going to change his emotional dysregulation at home. And I want to explain to people where this comes from. There's this idea with therapy, and this kind of dates back to what we would call psychoanalysis, right? That if you express feeling words, or if we can get a child to express, they're angry about something or they are jealous of their sibling, well, therefore that will change their behavior. And I'm sorry to tell you, that doesn't work. Okay. Just having them express feeling words or talk about, why they're jealous of their brother or whatever, it's not going to change their behavior, as Mike explained before. So that was the one thing that came up. And I explained that I have a video on YouTube where it's from an attitude webinar where there's a psychologist explaining why CBT and play therapy do not work for, kids with ADHD. They can be useful for other things, but not for ADHD.
Yeah. And I think one thing that we really need to discuss here is one of the most beneficial and most important things about parent training is you are working with someone who truly understands executive functioning, truly understands ADHD, understands that it's not an academic-based disorder, it's not a school-based thing, you're dealing with behaviors in the home. And what parent training can do, the most powerful thing it can do is help parents do hard things. So that's the most important thing is, a lot of behavior, a lot of the parent training, oftentimes at first is really hard to hear. Ryan and I talk a lot about how Instagram and social media has become this feel-good parenting advice. It's not negative attention seeking, it's connection seeking. Just connect with your child more and the behaviors will go away. I can't tell you how many parents I've spoken to on the phone that said, oh yeah, I listened to that advice. I tried to talk to my kid more and connect more, and now the behaviors are worse because they know that I'm going to come to them and give them my full attention when they're upset and when they have big behaviors. So social media is going towards this positive thing of, it's all connection seeking, all this feel good, fluffy advice that's really not evidence-based and not beneficial. Real parent training and really all advice in life. Think about it. Think about any time you've been given advice on relationships, career, health, anything. It's all really hard to hear stuff because nothing worth doing in life is easy. So real parent training is giving you the strength, telling you what you probably already know deep inside. Yeah, I have to get rid of the screens in my house. Yeah, I got to sign my kid up for that activity that he keeps saying no to. Or, yeah, I got to learn to walk away when he starts cursing at me. Parent training can give you the strength to do those hard things. Because let's face it, so many parents out there, might have ADHD themselves. We know that ADHD is hereditary. So a lot of the parents have ADHD. So what Ryan and I find is that a lot of these parents kind of get stuck in this instant gratification mindset as well. So they'll learn a parent training strategy. They'll try it once, twice, maybe 3 times, and come back to us and be like, sorry, it didn't work. My kid's too tough. I'm going to have to go see a specialist or put him in therapy. It's going to take time. If you remove screens from your house because your child has a screen addiction, it's going to take 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks for that brain to detox from that instant gratification mindset before they realize the screens are not coming back. I now have to use my imagination and my creativity to do other things. Or if you start walking away and ignoring their negativity, it's going to take time for your child to realize, hey, this is no longer working. My dad is not taking the bait anymore. I'm going to have to find other ways to get attention in more healthy and positive ways. So parent training, the best parent training tells it like it is, tells you the hard stuff immediately, is not, beating around the bush, focused on client retention and keeping you as a client for as long as possible. It's telling you the truth from day one of what you need to do so that you see progress as quickly as possible and you can stop receiving these services as possible, so that you as the parent now have the tools to improve independence, positivity, and success in your child.
One of the things I always say is I don't want people to be lifelong members of my membership site. I want it to be as short as possible. And really what I'll tell you is I find that people who have stuck around for a long time, it's not because they necessarily need to rewatch everything. Maybe they'll go back and watch things sometimes. It's because they like coming to the office hours, and being able to ask questions, or they like going to the downloadables and like looking over the cheat sheets. But one thing I wanted to just mention, because Mike mentioned this, was when I never had any interest in creating like a parent behavior training program. So what I did was I took several different ones. I participated in, these trainings, and, the ones I took that I really like and I still think are great, like nurtured heart approach, like nonviolent resistance. I pull a lot from them, as well as, I like things like love and logic. So the one, consistent variable with all of those training programs that I participated in was one thing. None of them took executive functioning into account in terms of how does that impact behavior. So I said to myself, you know what? I want to create my own program that, it comes through this lens of executive functioning. So I don't want to do executive function coaching. It's not about working with kids. It's just not what I enjoy doing. But I wanted to at least have a parent behavior training program that really takes executive functioning into account, because that is, again, the thing that parents tend to not understand. So that was my angle with it. And, so far so good with it.
Exactly. And that's one of the most important things here is if your child has ADHD brain, it has ADHD, your child has a different brain than kids of the same age, same gender. ADHD is a disorder of the brain. It's different in terms of the dopamine and that development of the executive functioning skills and the prefrontal cortex. If there is not an executive functioning based parenting approach based on actual research, not, this stuff you're seeing on social media, actual research, but it's going to be hard to do. So if you take anything from this podcast, if you're getting advice from a therapist, from a counselor, from a doctor, whatever, and it's just super simple, easy to do things, chances are you're being led astray. Parent training should be difficult to do. It should be hard to hear. And it's like I said earlier, it's those things that deep down. I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with parents of like, hey, the reason why your kid's not doing homework, the reason why they're so dysregulated is because they're stuck in the virtual world so much. You're going to have to really decrease those screens if you want to see progress in other environments, or you need to get your kid out of the house. You got to sign him up for other activities. He needs to go outside and play. He's within the walls of the house too much. So he's just seeking your attention constantly. And how many times the parents say, you know what, you're right. I always knew that was true. I just needed to hear it from somebody. And they've already spent thousands of dollars in various therapies of people with doctorates and all these things. And none of those people told them those things. It was just, here's this hour session. I'm going to have a discussion with your child. And, that's it. Parents need to be able to do hard things. We're in a generation of kids now, this anxious generation of kids, where we have to start to think about what is life going to look for them after 12th grade. Are they going to be ready for college? Do they have the executive functioning skills to be successful on a college campus without mom and dad constantly prompting them to wake up, go to class, put your screens away, and do your work? Or if college is not, in the cards for them, are they truly employable? So like, are jobs going to hire your child over somebody else? Someone who needs to get there on time and follow directions and do non-preferred tasks on the job site. We focus so much on grades and homework and this and that, but what are their true skills beyond academia, beyond 12th grade? Like what are the prospects? Where is the executive functioning skills needed when mom, dad, an IEP, a 504, a therapist, a talk therapist aren't there to kind of hold their hands and accommodate them through everything?
One thing I want to mention before we finish up of what Mike was just saying, and made me think of this, The number of kids I've seen, both, working in special ed schools and just, in private practice as well, is the number of kids I've seen who are not college, bound, and they go in more of a vocational track. But when they get to the job, to Mike's point, they need basically to have a job coach standing next to them,
Yes.
prompting them the whole time, telling them what to do, reminding them what to do, getting them to do non-preferred tasks. And I have to tell you, that doesn't make you employable, and many of these kids, these are not, kids with intellectual disabilities who need that, higher level of support. They're kids who never developed the resiliency and the independence and the executive functioning, as Mike speaks about, to do these things post, having their whole support network from school, because that's not going to go with you to a job. So,
and the exact same thing with college. We have to look at, once again, let's look at these stats that people are turning a blind eye towards. And that is, America leads the world in first semester college dropouts. And once again, these kids are getting accepted to the college for all the right reasons. They have the grades, they have the SAT scores, but they don't have the executive functioning skills to be successful away from mom and dad. And I can't tell you how many parents, they have spent thousands of dollars on evaluations, on therapy every day, on hiring advocates to come to IEP meetings for them and do whatever they need to do. They spent their life savings to push their child from kindergarten to 12th grade graduation. And then all of a sudden, they go to college and all of that money was wasted because they have to leave after the first semester and they're right back home. They're living at home again, no college, no job, and they're right back at square one because it was all focused on grades and accommodating grades, and there was never a focus on executive functioning and parents doing the right thing. And I can't tell you how many parents, just I hate to constantly bring up screens again, but how often that's what it is, where parents are spending thousands of dollars on therapies, thousands of dollars on advocates, but the screens are never dealt with. So they were able to get decent grades at school, good SAT scores, get accepted to college, persevere, but the screen addiction was never taken care of. So now you're sending a kid to college with a screen addiction, and it's impossible for them to be successful when they're up all night on their phone, on video games, on Discord, and you expect them to be able to put those things away on their own. So parents, we have to be able to do the hard things, and that's what parent training is all about. So if you're working with someone that's not pushing you out of your comfort zone as a parent, because that's what it's all about. We talk about our kids getting out of their comfort zone, figuring out ways to be uncomfortable, embrace discomfort, and be able to do non-stimulating, non-preferred tasks. You as the parent have to do that too. Ryan always says, it's the perfect quote, your child is not your partner in parenting. So if your child is having negative reactions to your parenting decisions and your parenting choices, and they're pushing back against them, chances are you're probably doing something right.
Yes. Yeah. So Mike, what's the one takeaway you want people to take from this episode?
So yes, what I would say is if you currently have your child in any sort of therapy, counseling, social skills group, anything, and parent training, parent communication is not a top priority, I can't tell you every single day I hear from parents, oh yeah, I have him in therapy. I have no idea what's going on in there. I never hear from the therapist. All I know is he likes going because they play games. I don't know what's happening. That's a waste of money. Remember, the focus has to be natural environment. If you are not seeing progress in the natural environment, one of these things with therapy is we've gotten into this mindset, and you see this with IEP therapies and IEP interventions. It's always tracking data in the session. So yeah, in the session, I see this progress, but is there progress in the natural environment? Are they actually making friends, keeping friends? Are they actually improving their test scores? Are they blowing up less, interrupting less, having less dysregulation? We have to focus on the natural environment. That's what it's all about.
If there's anything that's going to make me run headfirst into a wall is when I hear about whatever kind of therapy it is, whether that's, speech language or with, mental health, is when I hear about a kid being in a session for, 50 minutes and then they leave and the parent comes in for the last 5 minutes. Drives me insane, because in that 5 minutes, you're not going to teach parents skills in that amount of time. You're basically rehashing, what you talked about. Maybe, my one takeaway for this episode is that often things need to get worse before they get better. And that is something I emphasize to parents, that when you step into your parental authority, when you take back control of your home, when you implement more structure, when you have expectations of your child, they are going to resist they could resist, and things often will get worse before they get better because this feels, a loss to them, or it feels difficult that you're putting more demands on them when they don't have the resiliency yet to, handle those demands. But this is how you develop resiliency, by having to do things that are not interesting to you. So when I say things need to get worse before they get better, there is a reason for that. It's because we're working on lagging skills. And for skills to improve, kids are, as Mike said, have to come out of their comfort zone, and they will, particularly kids with ADHD, will fight coming out of their comfort zone to the greatest extent possible, some of them. So that's my takeaway. Things have to get worse sometimes before they get better, and they will get better.
Yeah, and just overall, the reason you're putting your child in any sort of therapy, counseling, services, whatever, it's not to get them through today, it's to get them through their life. We have to remember, we're not trying to just push them through and make things as easy as possible for right now. We have to remember the long term. We had an entire episode about this. We are doing this for the child so they can be successful when we can no longer help them, period. The IEP goes away, the 504 goes away, the accommodations go away, the parents go away. We have to go back to independent skills, and the only way you're going to gain those skills is by doing hard things and by keeping your mindset towards the long-term future. Parents have to be able to get out of their comfort zone and try some new things, and so does the child.
There you go. All right, before we finish up, I just wanted to thank everyone who has taken the time to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. And if you haven't, and if you like the podcast, we would really appreciate it if you can leave a positive review, because Mike and I do this, for free. We don't get paid for this. So any type of review that gets the word out there that this information we're putting out is helpful, we would really appreciate that. So thank you so much for listening or watching. Please feel free to leave us a review. And thanks so much for your time, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.
Take care.
Thanks for listening. To learn more about Mike's practice, GrowNOW ADHD, please visit his website, GrowNowADHD.com. To learn about the services Ryan provides, please visit ADHDdude.com. You can find Mike on Instagram at GrowNowADHD and Ryan on the ADHD Dude YouTube channel. We'd love to hear your feedback or questions, so feel free to contact us at the ADHD Parenting Podcast at gmail.com. The ADHD Parenting Podcast and content posted by GrowNOW ADHD or ADHD Dude are presented solely for general information and educational purposes. Our goal is to provide valuable insights and knowledge, not to replace professional services. Mike and Ryan cannot provide clinical consultation or free advice through social media or other forms of communication. The information on this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice. If you or your child have any medical or mental health concerns, please consult your healthcare professionals.